I want to define a word. If I said the word reasonable, what the word reasonable means, you would think it means being fair, being sensible, being logical, and we use it all the time. We use the word reasonable all the time. If someone throws themselves on the ground and starts yelling and kicking and screaming, and you'd say to them, well, they're 2 years old, that's reasonable behavior for a 2-year-old. If they're 40, that would not be reasonable behavior, right? If my kids were late, if I had a curfew for my kids, and I looked at the time, I'm waiting for them to come in, I want a reasonable explanation of why they're late. And so if I'd say, well, how come you're late? Why are you so late? And they said, oh, Dad, I'm sorry, but on the way home, I met a little old lady trying to get across the street with 2 bags of groceries. So I stopped the car and I helped her with the groceries, and I brought the groceries all the way to her house. It was 3 blocks away, and then she made some cookies, we had cookies and milk, and then, you know, I just prayed with her, and, you know, she gave her heart to the Lord. And that's why I'm late. Now that would be a reasonable explanation of why they're late, which, number one, never happened, and number two, would have been about the only one. If you, it's going to be nice next week, and if you go out and think, you know, I want to take my car for a cruise, and you're driving down the highway and you think, no cruise control today, it's so beautiful, I want to see what this baby can do, it's been a while. And you open it up and you're going 20, 25, 30 miles over the speed limit, and you get stopped, would it be reasonable to assume you're going to get a ticket, and that you deserve that ticket? That's reasonable, I would say, for your behavior. On the other hand, what does unreasonable mean? It is defined by beyond the limits of acceptable fairness. So what is acceptable fairness? That's rather subjective. So if the curfew is midnight and the kids get home at 12:15, to them that's reasonably late. To me, they throw curfew. So what's acceptable and what's fair can be very subjective. If I was a C student, if I tried hard, you know, but I got C's and maybe a couple of B's, not everybody is good in school. Not everybody gets it, right? Everybody has different talents. And maybe learning from books is not mine. And if my dad saw that I was getting C's and B's, I got C's and B's all my life, and I'm a senior in high school, and my dad said, this is unacceptable, you get straight A's from here on in. Would that be reasonable to think I can all of a sudden get straight A's? I mean, if I've been trying hard, you know, it just isn't. That's not reasonable to assume that I can do something that I just can't do. When I coached junior high football, the varsity coach was making his team do wind sprints. And he had them timed. And everybody had to do the wind sprint, a 100-yard dash within a certain period of time. And the running backs and the wide receivers did it, you know. But a couple of linemen, they couldn't run that fast. So you know what he did? Made them do it again until everybody ran it in that time, within that period of time. And they didn't do it the second time, the third time, the fourth time. For about 20 minutes, he had them run wind sprints. They couldn't do it. It's physically impossible. So was it reasonable or is that unreasonable for him to think that if they don't do it in 3 or 4 times, they're not going to do it the 10th or 20th time, right? That's unreasonable. So, would you say God is reasonable or is God unreasonable? Don't answer. I just want you to put that around here for a little bit, build it around a little bit. Is he logical and fair, or are things kind of irrational and unfair? Last week, we left Israel in a box. Mountains to the west and the south of them, the Red Sea to the east of them. They came in from the north. Who led them? God. Pillar of cloud by night, fire, or cloud by day, fire by night. And now here they are, can't get out, and to the north comes Pharaoh's army. There is no escape for them. Now, was it reasonable to assume that Pharaoh and his army were going to be able to destroy Israel and take back his slave labor? It looks like it's pretty reasonable, like it's going to be on his side. Was it reasonable for God to lead his people into this predicament? Does that sound like reasonable? That you would just get these people out of Egypt, 10 plagues, it's only been a few days, and he leads them into a trap? It doesn't sound very reasonable to me. How about Israel? When they found out that here we are, the only way back is this way, and this is where the army of the Egyptians are, what did they do? Complain. Is it reasonable for you to complain in a situation like that? We know the story of the Red Sea party, and before we read it, I just wanted to mention something. When I look at the Israelites complaining about their situation, you kind of look down on them, kind of spiritually look down on them, but it's because you know that God is going to part the Red Sea. But when you're in that box, and it feels like the whole world is kind of closing in on you, and there just is no reasonable escape or answer to your problem, we do what they did for the most part. We complain about our situation. And I just want to read what Moses does in chapter 14, verse 13 and 14. Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Stop complaining. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward." That's where the Red Sea is. Could you imagine you up in the Devil's Lake? If God said, just go right through the middle of Devil's Lake to the other side, you would think that is an unreasonable thing for God to have you do, in my book, in my mind. There are not very many mature Christians when you see a lot of oppression, the things of the world coming at them, where they stop and they listen to God and then come up with a plan. They patiently endured, knowing that God got them there. God's going to get them out of there. Many, many times I felt like God was leading us to a place, and I thought, no, what are we going to do? And I get a little frustrated, but God has never just stopped leading me. Sometimes for some reason, you got to stay around in that situation, but I feel like that's just God's way of testing us, wanting us to learn to be patient and wait on Him and watch as He moves and then follow that direction, not in my own flesh. Fear, we're afraid of things closing in on us. It doesn't look good for the Israelites. I don't understand why God led them there. Two things, by the way, about this, just concern. When God leads, there always seems to be a way out. He never leaves us or forsakes us. That's one scenario. The other is we've done things ourselves. You can't overspend because of greed and then go, "God, why did you do that? Why did you have my car break down or something?" That wasn't, you have put yourself in that situation. So things that you do that are not of God or righteousness or following, and now you feel that's punishment. And sometimes there's testing and sometimes there's discipline. So this seems to be a testing time. How will they react? Remember, they've been slaves for 400 years. They just had Passover, death passed over. They march out of Egypt. I mean, there's a parade. They're all excited. They've only been gone for a few days, and now they're stuck. Okay? And God says, "Don't worry. Just Move forward, church. Don't worry about it. We're going to move forward. Peace. Peace is an indication of our faith in our relationship with God. Faith is not believing what you can see or understand. Faith is our confidence in the things we don't see, we can't understand, what isn't reasonable. So, God's command to move forward doesn't make sense. There's 4 options for the Israelites. Here they are, remember? They're stuck. No fault of their own, they're stuck. So the one option is, let's just wait here and complain, and then I'll complain a little bit more. And as the day goes on, why don't we complain even more? Has your complaining, by the way, ever solved anything or made anybody feel any better? It hasn't. So complaining isn't a great option. That's the one that they were doing initially. The second option in their case would be to go up the mountain. Is that I mean, the mountain was one area. They knew they couldn't, should I go down that mountain? Well, some of them probably could have made it up the mountain. I don't know how sheer the mountain was, if it was unclimbable or not, but maybe some of the most athletic of them could have maybe made that trek. However, what is happening to the body then? You're weakening the body when some of you are leaving, but others can't. The young children, the elderly, they can't go. Your livestock won't be able to go. Anybody sick or ailing, the carts wouldn't have made it, but some of you would have made it. And even if you make it up the mountain, does that mean the enemy's going to not pursue you up there? You'll be looking over your shoulder. You've never taken care of the problem by running away if you could get up that mountain. The third, and this is the most popular way to go when you're in a situation, is go back to a time when you weren't in that situation. Where did they want to go? They were very willing to go back to Egypt, back as slaves, back to making bricks, and living under the ruleship of a pharaoh. They were willing to do that. That's what they were complaining about, right? What? Is there no graves, in the wilderness? Not enough graves? Why don't we could have died in Egypt easier, right, than having to do this. They want to go to a time and place. And we do that a lot. And I'll tell you how you know you've gone back to Egypt. When you're a Christian and you're filled with the Spirit and you walk by the Spirit, that fruit of the Spirit, the love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, all that wonderful gifts of the Spirit, that is how we walk. That's how you're supposed to walk in this world. And when things happen, you don't walk any differently than by God's Spirit and by His power. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were told, bow down to this idol or go in the fiery furnace, what was their option? Well, to them there was no option. They just said, we can't bow down to you because there's only one God and you're not it. We will go into that furnace and God will save us, but even if He doesn't, we're not going to bow down to you. They're going to continue in the relationship with God to the very. Paul said, if I die, I'm with Christ. If not, I'm going to keep on evangelizing. Even in prison or out of prison, no matter where I am, my relationship with God is going to maintain. He never wanted to go back to being a Pharisee of Pharisees. We tended to go back in a time when God was not active in our life. And so we do get angry. And we can become bitter. You can become unforgiving. You start going back into the time that you were in the flesh. That's how you know you made choice number 3. You're going back to a time where your life was not great with God. The fourth option, and this is the option for the church and the Christian, because God spoke it. God said, no, we're moving forward. Isn't that awesome? We're going to move forward. You're not going to stand here. This isn't my plan for you to stay right here. It's not my plan for you to go back. It's not my plan for you to go up that mountain, where it's no, my plan for you is to follow me. Remember, that's what they did initially to get there. But God's not done with them. Move forward. Now I want to just look at the Red Sea. Because that is the most unreasonable option. That's the most impossible option. I mean, it's possible, a few could go up the mountain, right? It's possible to go back to Egypt. It's possible to stay there and just keep complaining. But that's the most unreasonable option, is to move forward. But that is where God is telling us to go. The least reasonable is, in this case, is God going to the Red Sea. Now, we don't know where they crossed the Red Sea. But I did a little math and wanted to try to figure some stuff out. I told you there's about 3 million Israelites. Do you know what a mile looks like if you go down a section line? I know farmers know miles pretty well. If you go down a section, what a mile looks like, square. There is about 3 million square yards in a square mile. And I figure a yard of, 3 feet by 3 feet would be enough for somebody to occupy a space, about a yard. Just rough, okay? And so, 3 million, if you could look at a field that's 1 mile square, there would be 3 million people kind of shoulder to shoulder. Now obviously they're probably not that tight of a group. They're probably spread out a little bit, plus they have who knows how much livestock and some carts. So the Israelites are going to have to be maybe 2 miles by maybe 1 mile, or maybe more. That's the size that the Red Sea is going to be opening up for them to march through. That's an incredible ordeal. That's what God is about to do. Then the Red Sea itself. How deep is that Red Sea? Well, nobody knows, right? But you have to kind of figure that when the waters came back, it drowned the horsemen and the chariots and everybody else. So I'm thinking, conservatively, it's at least 10 feet deep. Otherwise, I think they'd probably be able to get out possibly. But it's got to be somewhat depth, right? Some depth to it. That water had to go someplace. So when that wind flows, that water isn't evaporated, it becomes a wall. All that water is dispersed someplace. It becomes a wall on each side, 20, 30 feet high. It's a wall of water on each side. It doesn't just sort of blend in like a shore on each side, it's flat. It says there's a wall above them. And that's what they have to walk through. We got to go forward. That's what he saw, and that's what took place. Now, I want to read the rest of that story. It's the most it's a story everybody knows. Starting in verse 19. The angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. And the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians took up the pursuit, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. They all went in after them in the midst of the sea. And it came about at the morning watch that the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. And he caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians cried out and said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak. While the Egyptians were fleeing right into it, then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. That's quite a story. Kind of interesting, this pillar that had led them the whole time now moved behind them. And what's kind of cool about that is, to the Israelites, there was enough light a mile so they could see where they were going. They could see where they're heading in the night. So it lit up toward the north for the believers, for his children. But that same pillar, which is God, was darkness to the world. It's kind of a neat description, that verse, that the same God, the same miracle-working God that's accepted by you and I as light and hope and wisdom and victory and moving forward. And to the world, God is darkness and misunderstood. And they stay in that cloud. So the most unreasonable path to take was going through the Red Sea. And it must have taken a little faith, wouldn't you say? Could you imagine? There it is, a wall on each side, and Moses said, let's go. I mean, how do you know how long is that wall going to last? It's a long trip. If you're 1 or 2 miles wide and long, that's a long journey across the Red Sea. Plus, as you're going across, Pharaoh's army is coming after you. Slowly, because the wheels are falling off and they're stuck in the mud, and slowly, but they are making headway towards you. So they might have crossed, it might have been several miles through the Red Sea. And then to turn and watch your enemy being destroyed. It's an incredible, unbelievable, unreasonable thing in this world. It is without logic. It is without sense. It is without fairness. It is unreasonable. That is not the first time, nor is it the last time God has been unreasonable in his dealings. It's unreasonable to believe that God just spoke the worlds into existence. That he just spoke and life was formed in heaven and earth and under the earth and in the sea. That he made a clump of dirt into a man and breathed his spirit in there and wanted fellowship with that he created. It's unreasonable to believe that we came to life like that. It's unreasonable to believe that, you'll see later on as they go through the desert, these 3 million people had to be fed. Remember, they only took a little bread without leaven. That's all they had. A week's supply, that was it. And now that they're in the wilderness on the other side of the Red Sea, how do you eat? How do you feed 3 million people? Every day, God poured out manna from heaven. Every morning they woke up, there was enough manna for everyone to have their fill of manna to make bread. 6 days. On the 6th day, God's going to give them double the amount because he doesn't want them gathering on the 7th day. It is a Sabbath day. It is a holy day. God does not want to see his people working on that day. It is to be consecrated to him. And so, I mean, if you think about it, for 40 years, times 3 million people, every day, 6 days a week, God provided. That's unreasonable to think that would happen. Later on, when they're thirsty and dry in the wilderness, there's no water around, they're dying of thirst, God tells Moses, just strike a rock. Just strike a rock. That doesn't sound very reasonable way of saving all these people from, a thirst. But Moses strikes the rock and water flows out, enough water for 3 million people to drink, plus fill all of their things that they need to fill up skins with water, plus all of their livestock. It's unreasonable to think that Joshua and his army just walked around the walls of Jericho for 6 days, and on the seventh day, they simply blew trumpets and started worshiping God, and the walls came down. It's unreasonable. It's unreasonable to think that God looked down at a young man whose only talents that we're aware of is he could play the harp pretty good with a sling. That's about it. But God said, no, that's the next king of Israel. It's unreasonable to believe that that young boy could be the greatest king of all of Israel. It's unreasonable to think that Daniel could go in the lion's den, hungry lions, and come out the next day without a scratch, unscathed. It's unreasonable. It's unreasonable to think that God, who made all those things, all of heaven and earth and all of man, wants to have a relationship with us, but we screwed that up. We're full of sin. We have sin in our lives. And so it seems to me very unreasonable that God would send his son for me. It doesn't make sense. I would never send my son for somebody else's salvation. But he did. That's unreasonable. It's unreasonable to believe that a shepherd would leave 99 to go after one. But he did that. He's done it. He's done that for me many times. He's left the 99 because he saw him straight a little. It's unreasonable to believe that after giving so much of his livelihood, the prodigal son comes back and he sees his father waiting for him with open arms. He gives him the robe and the ring and, the fatted calf. It's unreasonable to believe that God is so excited to see the prodigals coming back home. But that's God's love. It's an unreasonable love to me. It's unreasonable that Jesus would want us to call him friend. God is not reasonable. That makes him God. And I think his children need to start believing in the unreasonable. He wants us to be unreasonable. Things that are not really making sense, things that are out of the ordinary, God wants to do to us, and that's faith. Amen.
Wonder
Next time.